The Endorfy Arx 500 ARGB is part of the new series of cases from the Endorfy brand, the new image of what we used to call Silentium PC. This new case has been on the market for a while now and it did not leave us disappointed, having a good set of features and a good design, and in this review we shall see just how good it truly is. The Endorfy Arx 500 ARGB is the more expensive and slightly fancier variant of the regular Arx 500 Air, the latter variant being a cheaper and less flashy case but with the same shape and more or less the same features. However, the Arx 500 ARGB, as the name suggests, is packing addressable RGB LEDs and a dedicated RGB and fan controller. When we talk about the pricing, this case can be had for under 120 euros or US dollars, at least at the time of this review. Of course, there are cheaper cases out there, but not many with this level of features, and we will get down to those in a minute. The design of this case is simple yet good. It's nothing unique, we've seen these cases long before Endorfy did it, but the Endorfy Arx 500 ARGB does stand out from the crowd, thanks mainly to its simple front metal mesh that covers no less than 3 140mm addressable RGB fans which come pre-installed from the factory. You get another 140mm fan installed on the rear, with enough space on the top for either two 120 or two 140mm fans. The side panels are different, as is the case these days for, well, most cases. The left side panel is made from the usual tempered glass and has a small tint to it. To remove the panel, all you need to do is unscrew the two captive thumb screws located at the back of the case. The great thing about these screws is that you will never lose them. Another good thing with this panel is that it's not actually sitting directly on some screws or standoffs. It's sitting on a rail that is integrated into the case, and thus you must slide it out towards the back of the case. This way the side panel is not only easier to remove, but it's safer to remove as well, as it prevents you from dropping it. The right side panel is simple, made from the same metal as the rest of the case. This one is also using captive thumb screws at the back, and it has to be pulled towards the back of the case to be removed. At the front of the case we have no less than 3 140mm ARGB fans that are pre-wired to the included fan hub and RGB controller. These fans are identical and have good specs out of the box. Apart from the ARGB LEDs, these fans are using fluid dynamic bearing systems and have an RPM range of 200 RPM to 1200 RPM. Thus by default these fans should be pretty quiet even at maximum RPM. Should be the keyword here. The front fans are doing the intake of the case, while the rear 140mm fan is the only one doing the exhaust. The rest of the case is doing the exhaust passively throughout the top and bottom, and immediately we can see a problem with the front of this case. While the metal mesh is nice, it is the only barrier against dust, and it's just a mesh, not a dust filter, and thus a lot of dust will enter the case with time. Why a dust filter was not included at the front where the main intake of the case is, well, that is beyond me. Speaking of the bottom of the case, we have a large power supply cover that is not removable. However, this shroud does have its features. The top part has two SSD mounting points and a single fan mounting point that will accept only a single 120mm fan. The rear of the case is simple. Here you get 7 removable expansion slots covers and a dedicated power supply bracket which is attached to the case with 4 thumb screws. The underside of the case is what you can expect from a simple case like this. The entire chassis sits on 4 round feet that have a thick rubber pad on the contact side. The highlight of the bottom of the case is the removable dust filter. However, while it is a dust filter, it is not a breeze to remove and especially not easy to install, as it's not exactly sitting on rails but rather in these notches on the casing. Credit where credit is due though, this filter has a magnetic strip attached to it and thus it won't fall down with ease. Moving on with the top part of the case, which can accommodate either two 120mm fans or two 140mm fans, while the radiator support is alright with 120, 240 and 280mm radiators supported on the top. Speaking of radiator support, while at the top you can have 120, 240 and 280, at the front you can install radiators that are either 120, 240, 280 or 360mm. The dust filter installed on the top of the case is well made and pretty much the best filter that is installed on this case. On the right side of the case we have the included and pre-wired fan hub and RGB controller, mounted on the upper part towards the front of the case. This fan hub can control up to 5 fans and has up to 5 ARGB connectors for your various RGB devices, mainly fans and strips. There is ample amount of space for cable management and a lot of rubber grommets to pass through wires. Not only that, but the cable tie-down points are installed in the ideal locations to aid with the cable management and to evenly spread out the wires. The accessories of this case are included in a simple bag, and that's about it. No box, no container, just a bag at the back of the motherboard tray, and you get the usual rubber grommets for installing the SSDs, screws and zip ties. The installation of the system inside the case is easy because you have a lot of room to maneuver your motherboard and graphics card. You can install graphics cards with a length of up to 350mm if you're not using any radiators at the front, air CPU coolers with a height of up to 179mm and power supplies with a length of 300mm. Even though here you need to keep in mind that you need some room to route and store your cables as well, so keep that in mind. With the system installed, we get to see the RGB options with this case, and the options are, well, just the fans. That's it, that's the whole RGB thing, it's just the fans. But it's a good RGB system that can be synchronized with your motherboard and thus have a uniform light pattern across the entire system. The testing system used for case reviews, at least at the time, uses a full ATX motherboard with a Z97 chipset and an Intel i5-4690K, which is overclocked to 4.5 GHz on all cores. The graphics card is a GTX 780 Ti from ASUS and the power supply is a Seasonic Focus 650 watts. The case is using its included fans in its factory configuration and running at maximum RPM with both side panels installed and closed. When we talk about the CPU temperature, the Endorfy Arx 500 ARGB is impressive, with a CPU temperature that is just 1 degree behind the almighty Fractal Design Torrent, a high-end case that was never really cheap. In the case of the graphics card temperature, things are looking great as well, but the Endorfy Arx 500 ARGB is behind both the Fractal Design Torrent RGB and the Seasonic Synchro. This is the case because both of those cases, no pun intended, have higher powered fans and a better intake design. Still, the fact that the Endorfy Arx 500 ARGB hold its own in this test and does so at more than half of the price tag is impressive to say the least. However, all this performance comes at a cost, and here is where the higher price tag of the cases before mentioned starts to make a bit more sense, because both the Fractal Design Torrent RGB and the Seasonic Synchro are quieter overall than the Endorfy Arx 500 ARGB, with all fans pushing their maximum speed. Well, just barely quieter, but the point still stands. The Endorfy Arx 500 ARGB is not exactly a quiet case at maximum RPM, especially since it lacks any sort of sound installation. Looking back at the testing, the Endorfy Arx 500 ARGB is a good case, and for under $100 or euros, it is really good value. It is good looking, has RGB LEDs and good fans pre-installed from the factory. The space to work with inside this case is good too, so you can even go with a dual graphics card setup and still have plenty of room left. However, while this case is great, it has one major letdown. It lacks an intake dust filter, which is something that I cannot understand. Of course, the reasoning might be to have a less restrictive airflow in the intake side, but still you have the main intake of the case left completely exposed to dust, which is not that great. If you can look past that negative point, then this case is a great choice for you or anyone that wants an affordable case that can deliver a great performance out of the box and be easy to work with. The design and build quality are great too, and thus the positive outweigh the single negative. If you like this review, then you might consider subscribing for more, and if you want to support me in a direct way, then in the description below you will find the links for both the Patreon and the subscriber star pages of this channel.